Welcome. Today's story dives into one of the most chilling moments in prison history involving Bumpy Johnson. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you value well-researched, true stories built on real data and verified sources, make sure you subscribe, because a lot of hard work goes into uncovering facts that most people never hear. What happened after inmates hid a razor blade in Bumpy Johnson's food shocked everyone, and the response rewrote the rules inside those walls. Bumpy Johnson, born Ellsworth Raymond Johnson in Charleston, South Carolina, was far more than a stereotypical gangster. From an early age, he showed a sharp intellect and a defiant streak that set him apart. After moving to Harlem as a teenager, he quickly absorbed the realities of street life, shaped by poverty, racism, and limited opportunities. These early experiences forged a personality that combined brutality with discipline and anger with calculation. What made Bumpy unique among crime figures was his mind. He was an avid reader who loved history, philosophy, and poetry, often quoting Shakespeare and writing his own verses. Guards, lawyers, and fellow inmates alike noted that he spoke with precision and purpose, never wasting words. This intellectual side earned him an unusual level of respect, even from people who feared him. He was not reckless. Every move was thought through. On the streets of Harlem, Bumpy rose through the ranks not just by force, but by strategy. He became the right-hand man of Stephanie St. Clair, the powerful numbers queen who taught him how power really worked through alliances, influence, and reputation. Under her guidance, he learned how to control territory without constant violence, a lesson that would later define his behavior in prison. Bumpy's reputation followed him everywhere, especially behind bars. Prison was not a place that broke him. Instead, it became another arena where he asserted control. Guards knew him as disciplined and intelligent, while inmates knew him as someone who never forgot a slight. He understood prison politics deeply and navigated them with the same precision he used on the streets. Despite his criminal life, many in Harlem saw Bumpy as a protector. He was known to help local residents, support struggling families, and quietly fund community needs. This dual image, ruthless enforcer and neighborhood benefactor, made him both feared and admired. It also reinforced his sense of identity as someone who lived by a strict personal code. Code was central to who Bumpy Johnson really was. He believed respect was non-negotiable and betrayal was the ultimate offense. He could tolerate insults, but calculated attacks were another matter entirely. Once crossed in a meaningful way, he believed consequences were necessary, not out of rage, but to restore balance and authority. Understanding who Bumpy Johnson was is crucial to understanding everything that followed. He was not impulsive, not careless, and not easily intimidated. So when inmates attempted to assassinate him in one of the most cowardly ways imaginable, it wasn't just an attack on his life. It was a challenge to everything he stood for. And challenges in Bumpy Johnson's world were never ignored. By the time Bumpy Johnson entered prison, his name already carried weight. Inmates had heard the stories long before they ever saw him. Stories of Harlem, of power, of a man who survived betrayals and street wars without losing control. In prison culture, reputation often matters more than physical size, and Bumpy's reputation arrived before he did, creating a quiet tension from day one. Unlike many inmates who tried to assert dominance loudly, Bumpy did the opposite. He observed, listened, and spoke only when necessary. This restraint made other prisoners uneasy because unpredictability in prison is dangerous. People quickly realized that Bumpy wasn't trying to prove himself. He already knew who he was, and that confidence alone discouraged many from testing him. Guards also recognized something different about him. While they never forgot who he was or why he was there, they noticed his discipline. He followed rules when it suited him, avoided pointless conflict, and carried himself with calm authority. This didn't make him favored, but it did make him respected as someone who understood consequences and control, which gave him subtle leverage inside the system. Among inmates, Bumpy became known as a man who valued respect above everything. He didn't bully weaker prisoners, nor did he tolerate chaos around him. That balance earned him a strange kind of neutrality. People felt safer around him, but were careful not to cross him. In a place where alliances shift constantly, this stability made him influential. Word spread that Bumpy never acted out of impulse. If there was a problem, he addressed it quietly. If there was an insult, he remembered it. And if someone made a serious move against him, others knew the response wouldn't be immediate, emotional, or sloppy. It would be calculated. That knowledge alone prevented many conflicts before they ever began. Younger inmates often watched him closely, learning how he navigated prison life without drawing unnecessary attention. He didn't posture, didn't boast, and didn't threaten. His presence alone was enough. In prison, where fear usually screams, Bumpy's reputation, whispered, was far more intimidating. This reputation behind bars created an unspoken rule. Bumpy Johnson was not to be taken lightly. Any action involving him carried consequences beyond the moment. So when inmates decided to hide a razor blade in his food, it wasn't a random act of cruelty. It was a deliberate challenge to one of the most respected and dangerous reputations in the prison. Prison power dynamics are rarely about strength alone. They revolve around perception, alliances, and unspoken rules. Every facility has its own hierarchy, shaped by race, gangs, long-timers, and individuals with reputations that demand respect. Power shifts quietly, often through intimidation, favors, or calculated acts meant to test boundaries. Survival depends on understanding where you stand and who you should never provoke. In this environment, respect functions like currency. Inmates trade it, protect it, and fight over it because losing respect can mean becoming a target. A single moment of weakness can invite constant harassment or worse. That's why many prisoners feel pressured to respond aggressively to even minor slights, just to maintain their position in the social order. At the top of these hierarchies are inmates who rarely raise their voices. They don't need to. Their power comes from consistency and history, what they've done before, and what people believe they're capable of doing again. These figures often act as unofficial leaders, settling disputes or influencing outcomes without direct involvement. Conflict in prison is often indirect. Instead of open attacks, inmates use subtle methods to harm rivals while avoiding immediate blame. Tampering with food, spreading rumors, or Setting traps are common tactics because they create damage while maintaining plausible deniability. These acts are especially dangerous because they break the few remaining rules inmates rely on for basic safety. Food, in particular, holds deep significance behind bars. It's one of the few comforts prisoners have, and interfering with it is seen as a deeply personal violation. An attack involving food sends a message that nowhere, even during the most routine moments, is safe. In prison culture, that kind of move is considered a serious escalation. Power struggles also involve observation. Inmates constantly watch how others react to pressure. When someone is tested, everyone pays attention not just to the outcome, but to the response. A weak or emotional reaction invites more attacks, while a calm, controlled response can shut down future challenges instantly. Understanding these dynamics explains why the razor blade incident mattered so much. It wasn't just an attempt to harm Bumpy Johnson. It was a strategic move within a brutal system designed to measure his power, his resolve, and his willingness to defend his position. And in prison, once that kind of test is issued, the response defines everything that follows. As time passed, the atmosphere around Bumpy Johnson inside the prison began to shift. Small changes in behavior, subtle looks, and whispered conversations hinted that tensions were building beneath the surface. In prison, conflict rarely explodes without warning. There are always signs, and those paying close attention could feel something coming. Certain inmates saw Bumpy's influence as a threat. His calm authority disrupted existing power structures, especially among those who relied on fear and chaos to maintain control. The fact that he didn't bully others or create unnecessary violence made him even more dangerous in their eyes, because stability weakens opportunists who thrive on disorder. Jealousy also played a role. Bumpy's reputation earned him respect without constant confrontation, something many inmates spent years trying to achieve through aggression. This imbalance bred resentment. Some saw him as untouchable, and in prison, the idea that someone might be beyond reach can provoke reckless attempts to bring them down. At the same time, alliances were quietly shifting. Inmates often align themselves based on protection, favors, or shared enemies. A few individuals began testing the waters, pushing minor boundaries to see how Bumpy would respond. When those moments passed without immediate retaliation, some mistook his patience for vulnerability. Rumors began circulating, truths and exaggerations designed to undermine his standing. In prison, rumors are weapons. They create doubt, isolate targets, encourage others to act without getting their own hands dirty. Even someone as respected as Bumpy wasn't immune to these psychological tactics. The tension reached a point where inaction itself became dangerous. In prison culture, prolonged silence after repeated tests can be interpreted as weakness, regardless of intent. Those watching closely were waiting for a defining moment, a clear signal of whether Bumpy would assert himself or allow his position to erode. This growing pressure set the stage for something more extreme. The environment had become volatile, and someone decided that subtle provocations were no longer enough. What followed wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was the result of rising tensions finally boiling over into a deliberate and potentially deadly move. The razor blade incident was both shocking and meticulously planned. Someone among the inmates had decided to target Bumpy Johnson in the most insidious way possible by hiding a razor blade in his food. In prison, food is sacred. Interfering with it is not just a threat to life, but a deeply personal attack. Choosing this method showed careful calculation, meant to humiliate and harm him without an immediate confrontation. It wasn't a random act of violence, it was deliberate. The perpetrator had observed Bumpy closely, waiting for the right moment when his meal could be tampered with. Timing was critical in these schemes, because even a minor mistake could reveal the plot prematurely and put the attacker at risk. This level of premeditation demonstrated that those involved understood both the danger and the stakes involved. When the razor blade was discovered, or when Bumpy realized something was wrong, the atmosphere immediately changed. Other inmates sensed that a serious escalation was underway. In prison, actions like this ripple fast. Everyone notices, and whispers spread about what happened, who could be responsible, and how the target might respond. The tension became almost palpable. For Bumpy, this was more than an attack on his body. It was an assault on his authority. Accepting it quietly would signal weakness, eroding the respect he had painstakingly built over years. In his world, reputation wasn't optional, it was survival. The act of hiding a razor blade in his food was a direct challenge to his control, and he knew it required a precise and decisive response. The psychological impact on the prison population was immediate. Inmates realized that someone had been bold or foolish enough to target a man whose reputation commanded fear and respect. Observers began speculating about how Bumpy would react, some hoping for retaliation, others fearing it. This uncertainty heightened anxiety and shifted the prison's power dynamics in real time. Despite the danger, Bumpy didn't react impulsively. He evaluated the situation with the same calm calculation that had guided him through decades of Harlem street life and previous conflicts. Every detail, from the placement of the razor to who might have had access, was considered. This methodical thinking turned a moment of potential vulnerability into an opportunity to reinforce his dominance. The incident became a turning point. It wasn't just about the immediate threat, it was a test of authority, intelligence, and courage. Bumpy Johnson's response would not only determine the fate of those who tried to harm him, but also send a clear message to the entire prison population. Challenging him in any way carried consequences that no one could ignore. The discovery of the razor blade marked a pivotal moment, one that instantly altered the prison atmosphere. Bumpy Johnson didn't need confirmation from anyone. He could sense the betrayal immediately. In prison, small details matter: who handled the food, who lingered nearby, even subtle shifts in other inmates' behavior. All of this provided clues, allowing him to piece together what had happened without a single word being spoken. Word of the incident spread quickly, as it always does in confined environments where everyone is hyper, aware of potential threats. Other inmates whispered, speculated, and tried to figure out who had dared challenge Bumpy. The prison was suddenly charged with tension, and every glance or interaction became a potential indicator of loyalty or guilt. It was a moment when fear and anticipation coexisted in the same space. For Bumpy, understanding the situation was just the first step. He needed to remain calm and composed, because a hasty reaction could backfire. Prisoners watch each other constantly, and impulsive action can make a target of anyone, even someone with a reputation like his. By assessing the situation carefully, he maintained control and ensured that any retaliation would be precise and authoritative. At the same time, the guards began to notice subtle shifts in behavior. While they might not have known the specifics of the razor blade incident, they could sense that tension had escalated. Prisoners who normally kept their heads down were acting cautiously, and the energy in the cell block had changed. This indicated that something significant had occurred, even without direct knowledge. Psychologically, the discovery put everyone on edge. The very act of hiding a razor in food is designed to instill fear, and it succeeded. Inmates became more alert, evaluating their surroundings and reconsidering alliances. It also served as a test. Observing Bumpy's response became a way for others to gauge his strength and influence. Bumpy, however, long understood the power of perception. He knew that demonstrating calm control could be more terrifying than outright violence. Staying measured, he allowed fear to grow in the minds of those who had planned the attack. In prison, the threat of action is often as effective as the action itself, and he leveraged that understanding fully. The incident solidified a key lesson in prison life. Attempts to undermine authority rarely go unnoticed, and the consequences for the wrong move can be severe. Bumpy Johnson's awareness and deliberate response not only neutralized the immediate threat, but also sent a clear signal to the entire prison population that challenges to his authority would be met with calculated, unflinching power. Immediate reactions in the prison after the razor blade incident were a mix of shock, fear, and speculation. Inmates who had witnessed or heard about the event were instantly aware that something serious had happened, and it set off a chain reaction of tension throughout the cell block. People spoke in hushed tones, watching each other closely to see who might be responsible, and every interaction became a potential clue. Some prisoners felt emboldened by the audacity of the act, thinking that if someone could attempt to harm Bumpy Johnson, perhaps others could challenge him as well. But that boldness was tempered by fear. Bumpy's reputation was legendary, and everyone knew that retaliation, when it came, would be deliberate and calculated rather than impulsive. This mix of courage and caution created an uneasy environment where no one fully trusted anyone else. The guards noticed the subtle changes in behavior almost immediately. While they may not have known the details of the incident, they sensed heightened tension among inmates, more careful movements, and a general sense of unease. Prison officials could feel that the balance of power had been tested, and the slightest misstep could lead to further escalation. Inmates who had attempted the act or were even suspected of being involved were now under intense scrutiny. They had to navigate interactions carefully, as any sign of weakness could expose them to direct consequences. Fear spread not just from the immediate danger of Bumpy's response, but also from the understanding that the social order within the prison had been disrupted. Others in the prison became spectators, watching intently to see how Bumpy would handle the situation. In prison, reactions are as important as actions, and people gauge authority and strength by how one responds under pressure. His response would either reinforce his dominance or signal vulnerability, and everyone knew it. The psychological tension extended beyond those directly involved. Inmates began reevaluating alliances, questioning loyalties, and thinking twice about how they interacted with one another. The razor blade incident became a cautionary tale overnight, proof that even the most respected figures could be targeted, but also that such attempts would not go unanswered. Ultimately, the immediate reactions highlighted the delicate balance of fear, respect, and power in prison life. The razor blade had disrupted the equilibrium, and everyone, from the aggressors to bystanders, was forced to confront the reality that Bumpy Johnson was not only a man of reputation, but a strategist who would respond in a way that reasserted his authority and reminded everyone why challenging him was a dangerous mistake. Bumpy Johnson's response to the razor blade incident was swift, calculated, and unlike anything most inmates expected. He didn't react with blind rage or immediate violence. Instead, he assessed the situation carefully, noting who had access to his food, who had been nearby, and the likely suspects. His mind worked like a chessboard, anticipating the moves of everyone around him before making a single step. Once he identified the likely perpetrators, Bumpy began asserting his presence in subtle but unmistakable ways. He didn't announce revenge outright. Instead, he allowed rumors and actions to circulate, making it clear through behavior that he knew what had happened. In prison, the perception of knowledge and control can be as powerful as the act of punishment itself. Bumpy's retaliation was precise. He targeted the responsible inmates in a manner that demonstrated both power and intelligence. By responding with calculated force, he sent a clear message: anyone who attempted to harm him or challenge his authority would face consequences, and those consequences would be carefully measured, deliberate, and inescapable. The psychological impact of his response was immediate. Inmates who might have considered testing him in the future were forced to reconsider. Fear and respect merged, reinforcing his position at the top of the social hierarchy. Observers understood that Bumpy Johnson's control extended beyond mere physical strength. It was his strategic mind and reputation that truly made him untouchable. Importantly, his retaliation wasn't about personal anger. It was about restoring balance and authority. In his world, any violation of respect or challenge to power demanded a response, for vengeance but for maintaining order. His actions demonstrated a principle. Authority must be defended not through chaos, but through disciplined, intelligent action. The response also served to strengthen his alliances. Those who remained loyal saw firsthand that Bumpy protected his own and enforced the rules of engagement. Loyalty in prison is fragile, and his measured reaction reassured allies that he was a leader who could be trusted to handle threats without unnecessary risk. By the end of the episode, it was clear that Bumpy Johnson had reinforced his reputation not just as a feared figure, as a master strategist. The razor blade attempt had been an audacious move by his enemies, but his calm, decisive, and intelligent retaliation left the entire prison population in no doubt. Crossing Bumpy Johnson was a mistake that would never be forgotten. The psychological impact of Bumpy Johnson's response to the razor blade incident rippled through the prison immediately. Inmates realized that his intelligence and calm control made him unpredictable in the most dangerous way, whereas some leaders react with anger or reckless violence. Bumpy's methodical approach created a climate of uncertainty. No one could guess exactly what he would do next, and that uncertainty was terrifying. Fear spread among the perpetrators first. Those who had orchestrated the attack now understood that they were dealing with more than brute strength. They were up against a mind that calculated every possible outcome. Their anxiety wasn't just about potential physical retaliation. It was about the social consequences and the loss of standing among peers if Bumpy's dominance was challenged successfully. Other inmates, even those uninvolved, felt the psychological weight of the situation. In prison, observing the consequences of actions is just as important as experiencing them firsthand. Seeing Bumpy respond so precisely reinforced the reality that he controlled his environment in ways that extended far beyond direct violence. Respect and fear became inseparable in the minds of those around him. The incident also changed the behavior of anyone considering future challenges. People began to think twice before testing him, knowing that any misstep could result in severe repercussions. Bumpy had created an invisible barrier, one built not just on potential retaliation, but on the perception of strategic mastery that made him untouchable in the minds of others. Psychologically, his response functioned as both warning and lesson. It taught the prison population that attempts to undermine him would be noticed, analyzed, and addressed in a way that left no doubt about consequences. This reinforced his authority without him having to escalate into continuous violence, which is often the downfall of many incarcerated leaders. The ripple effects extended beyond fear. Respect grew among allies, who now saw Bumpy as not only strong but wise and capable of protecting them and maintaining order. Trust in his leadership strengthened, further isolating the attackers and anyone sympathetic to them. His influence became more secure than ever, built on both fear and admiration. Ultimately, the psychological impact was perhaps more powerful than the physical consequences. Bumpy Johnson's reputation evolved from being merely feared to being strategically untouchable. The razor blade incident became a defining example of how intellect, patience, and calculated action could control not just events, but the minds and behavior of an entire prison population. The razor blade incident caused an immediate shift in the prison hierarchy, and Bumpy Johnson's response solidified his dominance in ways that went far beyond the physical confrontation. Those who had previously questioned his authority, or even subtly challenged it, now realized that defying him carried consequences they could not afford. His measured yet decisive retaliation reaffirmed his position at the very top of the social order. Inmates who had aligned themselves with the perpetrators began to rethink their loyalties. The attempted attack demonstrated that anyone willing to test Bumpy could become a target, and by responding with calculated precision, He showed that betrayal and aggression would not be tolerated. This forced others to either fully commit to his side or risk marginalization. Or worse, the shift wasn't just about fear, it was also about respect. Allies who had seen the incident and observed Bumpy's handling of it understood that he possessed both brains and authority. This increased his influence as prisoners sought protection and guidance from someone who could control events without unnecessary chaos. His reputation as a fair but formidable figure strengthened the bonds of loyalty around him. Even previously neutral inmates began adjusting their behavior. They observed how power was asserted and realized that authority in prison is maintained not through sheer violence, but through perception, intelligence, and strategic action. Bumpy had demonstrated all three, reshaping the hierarchy in subtle but undeniable ways. The perpetrators themselves were marginalized, stripped of credibility and influence. Their reckless attempt at undermining Bumpy had the opposite effect. Instead of weakening him, it exposed their own vulnerability and lack of foresight. Others in the prison learned a vital lesson about the consequences of challenging someone of Bumpy's caliber, reinforcing his dominance further. Beyond the immediate circle, the ripple effect extended to the wider prison population. Alliances shifted quietly as prisoners reconsidered who wielded true authority. Bumpy's presence now commanded both compliance and cautious admiration, effectively redrawing the lines of power across the entire facility. By the end of the episode, the hierarchy had been irrevocably altered. Bumpy Johnson's response demonstrated that respect and fear, combined with calculated action, were far more effective than brute force alone. The razor blade incident became a defining moment in the prison. Story repeated among inmates as evidence of why he remained unchallenged and at the top of the social order. The long-term consequences of the razor blade incident went far beyond the immediate retaliation. For Bumpy Johnson, it reinforced his reputation as someone not to be trifled with, a man whose authority was absolute and whose intelligence made him nearly untouchable. The event became a defining story that other inmates would reference for years, a cautionary tale about the consequences of challenging him. For the perpetrators, the repercussions were severe. They weren't just physically threatened, they were socially isolated. In the prison environment, losing respect and credibility can be as damaging as physical harm. Other inmates who might have been inclined to associate with them reconsidered, leaving them vulnerable both psychologically and strategically. Their mistake effectively removed them from positions of influence within the prison hierarchy. The ripple effect extended to the broader inmate population. Witnessing Bumpy's calculated handling of the attack made it clear that intelligence and strategy were as powerful as raw strength. Inmates who might have relied on intimidation or brute force learned that careful observation, planning, and reputation management could determine survival and status. It subtly changed the behavior of many, fostering a cautious respect toward authority figures. Bumpy's allies also benefited from the long-term consequences. They saw firsthand that loyalty was recognized and rewarded, and that betrayal or disloyalty would be punished. This strengthened internal bonds among his supporters, creating a network of trust that further solidified his position and deterred future attacks against him. The incident also had psychological consequences that lasted long after the initial event. Fear and uncertainty lingered in the minds of inmates who had considered challenging him. Even those not directly involved understood the risk of defiance, which created a self-regulating environment in which respect for Bumpy became almost automatic. In addition, the story of the razor blade incident spread beyond the immediate prison population. New inmates learned of it as a rite of passage or warning, reinforcing Bumpy's legendary status. Over time, Tale contributed to his larger, then life persona, making him not only a dominant figure inside the prison, but also a figure of caution and awe in the broader criminal world. Ultimately, the long-term consequences solidified Bumpy Johnson's legacy as both a feared and respected leader. The incident didn't weaken him. It elevated him. It became a benchmark for understanding power dynamics, loyalty, and strategy in prison life, showing that reputation, intelligence, and calculated action could outmatch brute force and cement authority for the long haul. The razor blade incident remains significant today because it illustrates timeless lessons about power, respect, and strategy, both inside prison walls and in life beyond them. Bumpy Johnson's response demonstrated that authority is not maintained through fear alone, but through intelligence, observation, and carefully calculated action. The story continues to resonate as a masterclass in strategic thinking under pressure. It also serves as a historical reminder of the unique challenges faced by incarcerated individuals. Prison life is governed by its own rules, where even small actions can have disproportionate consequences. Bumpy's handling of the situation provides insight into how respect, reputation, and social influence operate in extreme environments. The incident underscores the importance of perception. Bumpy's calm, measured response created uncertainty and fear among his adversaries, showing that the way one reacts can be as impactful as the action itself. This principle has applications far beyond prison. It demonstrates the power of psychological influence in any hierarchical system. For historians and true crime enthusiasts, the story continues to fascinate because it combines human psychology, strategic intelligence, and the brutal realities of prison life. It's a vivid example of how one man's reputation and calculated approach allowed him to maintain control in an environment designed to test everyone's limits. The tale also carries lessons about loyalty and alliances. Those who aligned themselves with Bumpy learned the value of choosing their allies carefully, while those who betrayed him faced swift and irreversible consequences. This reinforces the idea that trust and respect are currencies more valuable than brute force in maintaining long-term influence. Culturally, the incident has become part of the mythology surrounding Bumpy Johnson. His legendary status in Harlem, in organized crime history, and in popular media is reinforced by stories like this, where intellect, patience, and strategic action triumph over reckless aggression. It shapes the way people remember him and provides a blueprint for understanding leadership under extreme conditions. Ultimately, the razor blade story matters because it highlights the intersection of intelligence, reputation, and survival. It shows that authority is earned and maintained through more than just fear or violence. It is the careful combination of respect, strategy, and psychological mastery. Bumpy Johnson's handling of the situation remains a timeless example of why he is remembered as one of the most formidable figures in criminal history.